Marisol Reyes boarded the Carnival cruise believing Bram Rowan was the answer to her loneliness. 5 days later, investigators found her with a torn mouth and clues pointing to a man who was never supposed to be on the ship at all.
Marisol Quindera had always lived a quiet life defined by routine, responsibility, and the constant pressure of survival. At 51, she had learned to accept that comfort was a luxury and that dreams were treats given only to those with easier lives. She worked at a small laundry shop in Manila, where the days were long and the air heavy with the scent of detergent and humidity. It was honest work, and she took pride in it, but it left little room for excitement. Most days ended with the same pattern. She would walk home through crowded streets, prepare a simple meal, and fall asleep while thinking about how different her life could have been if she had been born into better circumstances. She never complained. Her siblings admired her strength. Her neighbors admired her reliability. But deep inside, Marisol carried a quiet ache, a longing for something more than bills, chores, and the weight of expectations. She wanted companionship. She wanted someone who saw her not as a worker or a helper, but as a woman capable of being loved. One evening, after a long shift, she downloaded a dating app. It felt strange at first, like entering a world meant for younger people. She hesitated before creating a profile, unsure if anyone would even notice a woman her age. Yet something inside her pushed forward, whispering that life was too short to wait for happiness to appear on its own. That night, she matched with a man named Daryl Pike. Daryl was a 45-year-old American who presented himself as adventurous and free-spirited. His profile showed pictures of him hiking, relaxing on beaches, and posing in front of famous landmarks. He described himself as someone who believed life should be lived fully and boldly. His messages came quickly and consistently. He complimented Marisol's smile and the sincerity in her photos. He told her she deserved experiences she had never allowed herself to enjoy. Their conversations grew daily. Daryl asked about her life, her family, her work. He listened, or at least seemed to. He told her she was special. That word, special, struck Marisol deeply. No one in years had made her feel memorable or important. She found herself responding with more warmth than she intended. She didn't know whether she was falling for him or the idea of being seen. After months of talking, Daryl invited her to join him on a Carnival cruise leaving from Miami. He said he wanted to meet her in person and share something unforgettable. Marisol felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She had never been on a vacation outside the Philippines. She had never boarded a ship larger than the ferries that crossed Manila Bay. The idea of flying across the world to meet a man she had never seen felt like a decision that could change her life forever. Her family encouraged her. They said she deserved joy after years of sacrifice. They told her she shouldn't let fear stop her from experiencing something beautiful. Marisol agreed. She saved as much as she could, borrowed a small amount from a cousin to cover travel expenses, and bought new clothes for the first time in years. The day she boarded the plane to the United States felt unreal. The long travel hours exhausted her. But when she finally stepped onto the massive cruise ship, she felt like she had entered another world. The ship sparkled under the sun, decorated with bright colors and filled with cheerful passengers taking photos and exploring every corner. Music played loudly from the deck. The scent of ocean air mixed with the smell of buffet food drifting through the open corridors. It was honest work, and she took pride in it, but it left little room for excitement. Most days ended with the same pattern. She would walk home through crowded streets, prepare a simple meal, and fall asleep while thinking about how different her life could have been if she had been born into better circumstances. She never complained. Her siblings admired her strength. Her neighbors admired her reliability. But deep inside, Marisol carried a quiet ache, a longing for something more than bills, chores, and the weight of expectations. She wanted companionship. She wanted someone who saw her not as a worker or a helper, but as a woman capable of being loved. One evening, after a long shift, she downloaded a dating app. It felt strange at first, like entering a world meant for younger people. She hesitated before creating a profile, unsure if anyone would even notice a woman her age. Yet something inside her pushed forward, whispering that life was too short to wait for happiness to appear on its own. That night, she matched with a man named Daryl Pike. Daryl was a 45-year-old American who presented himself as adventurous and free-spirited. His profile showed pictures of him hiking, relaxing on beaches, and posing in front of famous landmarks. He described himself as someone who believed life should be lived fully and boldly. His messages came quickly and consistently. He complimented Marisol's smile and the sincerity in her photos. He told her she deserved experiences she had never allowed herself to enjoy. Their conversations grew daily. Daryl asked about her life, her family, her work. He listened, or at least seemed to. He told her she was special. That word, special, struck Marisol deeply. No one in years had made her feel memorable or important. She found herself responding with more warmth than she intended. She didn't know whether she was falling for him or the idea of being seen. After months of talking, Daryl invited her to join him on a Carnival cruise leaving from Miami. He said he wanted to meet her in person and share something unforgettable. Marisol felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She had never been on a vacation outside the Philippines. She had never boarded a ship larger than the ferries that crossed Manila Bay. The idea of flying across the world to meet a man she had never seen felt like a decision that could change her life forever. Her family encouraged her. They said she deserved joy after years of sacrifice. They told her she shouldn't let fear stop her from experiencing something beautiful. Marisol agreed. She saved as much as she could, borrowed a small amount from a cousin to cover travel expenses, and bought new clothes for the first time in years. The day she boarded the plane to the United States felt unreal. The long travel hours exhausted her, but when she finally stepped onto the massive cruise ship, she felt like she had entered another world. The ship sparkled under the sun, decorated with bright colors and filled with cheerful passengers taking photos and exploring every corner. Music played loudly from the deck. The scent of ocean air mixed with the smell of buffet food drifting through the open corridors. It was honest work, and she took pride in it. But it left little room for excitement. Most days ended with the same pattern. She would walk home through crowded streets, prepare a simple meal, and fall asleep while thinking about how different her life could have been if she had been born into better circumstances. She never complained. Her siblings admired her strength. Her neighbors admired her reliability. But deep inside, Marisol carried a quiet ache, a longing for something more than bills, chores, and the weight of expectations. She wanted companionship. She wanted someone who saw her not as a worker or a helper, but as a woman capable of being loved. One evening, after a long shift, she downloaded a dating app. It felt strange at first, like entering a world meant for younger people. She hesitated before creating a profile, unsure if anyone would even notice a woman her age. Yet something inside her pushed forward, whispering that life was too short to wait for happiness to appear on its own. That night, she matched with a man named Daryl Pike. Daryl was a 45-year-old American who presented himself as adventurous and free-spirited. His profile showed pictures of him hiking, relaxing on beaches, and posing in front of famous landmarks. He described himself as someone who believed life should be lived fully and boldly. His messages came quickly and consistently. He complimented Marisol's smile and the sincerity in her photos. He told her she deserved experiences she had never allowed herself to enjoy. Their conversations grew daily. Daryl asked about her life, her family, her work. He listened, or at least seemed to. He told her she was special. That word, special, struck Marisol deeply. No one in years had made her feel memorable or important. She found herself responding with more warmth than she intended. She didn't know whether she was falling for him or the idea of being seen. After months of talking, Daryl invited her to join him on a Carnival cruise leaving from Miami. He said he wanted to meet her in person and share something unforgettable. Marisol felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She'd never been on a vacation outside the Philippines. She had never boarded a ship larger than the ferries that crossed Manila Bay. The idea of flying across the world to meet a man she had never seen felt like a decision that could change her life forever. Her family encouraged her. They said she deserved joy after years of sacrifice. They told her she shouldn't let fear stop her from experiencing something beautiful. Marisol agreed. She saved as much as she could, borrowed a small amount from a cousin to cover travel expenses, and bought new clothes for the first time in years. The day she boarded the plane to the United States felt unreal. The long travel hours exhausted her, but when she finally stepped onto the massive cruise ship, she felt like she had entered another world. The ship sparkled under the sun, decorated with bright colors and filled with cheerful passengers taking photos.
The morning after Marisol stood on the observation deck, a strange tension settled over the ship. Most passengers moved cheerfully through the buffet lines and activity areas, unaware that something was shifting quietly beneath the surface. Marisol woke in the cabin feeling disoriented. Her head felt heavy and a dull ache pulsed behind her eyes. She sat up slowly, trying to steady her breathing as she adjusted to the dim morning light filtering through the curtains. The cabin was unusually quiet. Daryl was already awake, moving around with a focus that made her uneasy. His behavior seemed controlled and careful, as if every motion had been rehearsed. Marisol watched him from the bed, feeling that strange heaviness again, a weight that made her muscles slow and her thoughts foggy. She didn't understand why she felt so weak. The cruise was supposed to energize her, not drain her. She tried to convince herself that the symptoms were due to stress, jet lag, or long hours under the sun. But deep down, something about her condition felt unnatural. She stood up shakily, gripping the edge of the mattress to steady herself. When she finally made her way into the bathroom, she saw her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired and unfocused, as if she had not slept in days. Her skin looked unusually pale. She touched her cheek, feeling a slight tremor in her fingers. Marisol returned to the main part of the cabin and prepared for breakfast. She wanted fresh air and food in her stomach, hoping it would help. As she walked toward the dining area, she noticed several passengers glancing at her with quiet concern. She knew she wasn't moving normally. Her steps felt uneven, almost as though her body didn't fully belong to her. At the breakfast buffet, the atmosphere was lively. Families chatted loudly, children ran between tables, and the scent of eggs and pastries filled the room. The brightness felt overwhelming to Marisol. She held her tray tightly, trying to appear composed, but her hands trembled enough that a nearby passenger stepped aside, giving her space. She saw the elderly woman from before, Bernetta Lowe, sitting at a nearby table. Bernetta's eyes met hers, and the older woman's expression changed immediately. She recognized the distress in Marisol's face. It wasn't casual worry, it was fear. But Marisol looked away quickly, afraid of giving Daryl any reason to suspect her interactions with strangers. Daryl joined her at the table, placing her food down with a forced gentleness. His behavior seemed polite to anyone watching, but Marisol felt something darker beneath his calm exterior. He watched each bite she took, noticing each pause, each hesitant movement. She barely had an appetite, but forced the food down, hoping it would stabilize her. After breakfast, they walked around the ship again. The sun was bright, reflecting off the water. Children splashed in the pools, music played from the speakers, and yet everything felt strangely distant to Marisol. Her mind floated between clarity and confusion. She gripped the railings as they walked, needing the support. She wished for a moment alone, just something to help gather her thoughts. But Daryl never let her wander far. He stayed close, always observing, always anticipating her movements. She tried to slow her breathing, reminding herself that she needed to stay alert, no matter how foggy her mind felt.
In the early afternoon, a safety drill announcement played over the ship's speakers instructing passengers to gather near their muster stations. The sudden shift in routine made everyone move with mild annoyance, but it gave Marisol a brief moment of cover. As the crowd moved toward the designated areas, she drifted slightly away from Daryl, blending into the group. She found herself near Kayla Strun, the bartender who had previously noticed her condition. Kayla glanced at her again, clearly remembering the tremors and the expression of fear from the previous day. Kayla whispered something quietly under her breath, not expecting Marisol to respond, but the concern in her eyes was unmistakable. Marisol wanted to ask for help. She wanted to explain everything she had been feeling, but before she could gather the courage, Daryl appeared behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. His touch felt cold, controlling. He guided her away from Kayla with a firmness that appeared gentle on the outside, but carried a sharp warning beneath the surface. The drill ended, and passengers scattered back to their activities. Marisol's stomach churned with unease. She had hoped to distance herself from Daryl even briefly, but the moment slipped away too quickly. She wondered if anyone could see what she felt, the growing dread, the sense of being watched, the strange symptoms that made every step feel unnatural. Later that afternoon, Marisol attempted to rest in the cabin. She lay on the bed with her eyes closed, trying to slow the spinning inside her mind. I heard Daryl moving quietly around the room. The sound of him opening drawers, shifting items, pacing slowly, filled the silence. At times, I sensed him standing over me, studying me, as though evaluating something. When she woke from an uneasy doze, she found him sitting in a chair, staring at me. The expression on his face was unreadable, a mixture of calculation and something like ownership. Marisol felt her chest tighten with fear. She needed time away from him, even for a few minutes, so she told him she wanted to visit the deck for some fresh air. Daryl followed closely behind. The deck was crowded, which gave Marisol a false sense of comfort. She leaned on the railing again. The ocean breeze brushed against her skin, giving her a moment of clarity. She watched the waves crash gently against the side of the ship and tried to imagine a world where she wasn't afraid. For a brief moment, she felt a sliver of peace. That peace shattered instantly. Behind her, passengers noticed a commotion near one of the stairwell entrances. Two cruise ship staff members rushed down a hallway, followed by a security officer. The atmosphere shifted. People stopped talking and turned their heads. Marisol felt a surge of fear rise in her chest. Moments later, an announcement calling for medical staff to respond to an urgent situation near the lower deck cabins. Passengers exchanged confused glances. Marisol felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what was happening, but the sudden disruption felt dangerous. Daryl tugged her arm gently, urging her to return to their cabin. Marisol resisted, feeling her heart pound. She didn't want to be enclosed with him again. She didn't want to feel trapped. She stepped back, gripping the railing, trying to find stability. Her breath quickened and her vision blurred again. A staff member passing by noticed her unsteady posture and asked if she needed help. Marisol wanted to respond, but her voice caught in her throat. The staff member began to approach, only for Daryl to intervene, stating that Marisol was fine, just tired from the long trip. His tone was light, friendly, but there was a sharpness beneath it that made the staff member hesitate before slowly walking away. The dizziness grew stronger. Marisol felt her knees weaken. She grabbed onto the railing again, trying to fight the heaviness spreading through her body. Daryl stepped closer, positioning himself behind her as if to keep her upright, but she felt no comfort in his presence. She sensed something terrifying in his movements, something she had ignored for too long. He whispered something she couldn't fully hear, but his tone felt final, almost as if he believed no one would interfere with whatever came next. A wave of panic surged through her. She backed away instinctively, her vision trembling. Passengers nearby were distracted by the medical emergency unfolding elsewhere, giving the deck an odd combination of chaos and isolation. It felt as though the world had narrowed into a small space containing only Marisol and Daryl.
The dizziness intensified sharply. Her heartbeat echoed loudly in her ears. The last thing she saw clearly was Daryl's expression shifting into something cold and determined. Then, everything washed into darkness. When Marisol collapsed, several passengers rushed toward her. Daryl stepped back slightly, an odd look crossing his face. Crew members arrived quickly, lifting Marisol carefully as she drifted in and out of consciousness. She heard muffled voices, felt cold hands on her skin, and sensed motion as she was brought inside. The ship's medical team examined her as Daryl hovered nearby, refusing to leave the room. Marisol felt trapped between consciousness and unconsciousness, unable to speak or move as her body continued to weaken. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and deep inside she knew it was only the beginning.
Marisol drifted in a strange limbo as the medical team examined her in the ship's infirmary. Her mind floated somewhere between the harsh brightness of the room and a deep fog that clouded her senses. She could feel hands lifting her wrists, checking her pulse, adjusting her position. But everything felt distant. Voices blurred together like echoes underwater. She tried to open her eyes fully, but only managed a half blink before exhaustion pulled her back down. Daryl stood nearby, watching everything with an expression that was difficult to decipher. To the medical staff, he appeared anxious and attentive, but the tension in his posture revealed something sharper, something that made the nurse in the room glance at him more than once. Marisol sensed his presence like a shadow pressing against her skin. Even in her weakened state, she felt a spike of fear. The lead nurse, a steady woman named Helen Arcton, carefully assessed Marisol's condition. The tremors in Marisol's hands, her uncoordinated movements, her difficulty staying conscious, none of it seemed like typical exhaustion or dehydration. Helen asked a series of questions about symptoms, medications, and recent meals, though Marisol could barely form coherent thoughts to answer. Helen's concern deepened with every passing minute. Of all the staff members in the room, Helen was the first to subtly notice the tension between Marisol and Daryl. She noted the way Marisol's eyes flickered when he moved closer. She noted the stiffness in her posture whenever he leaned in. She noted the way Daryl answered questions on Marisol's behalf, cutting off attempts to verify details. Helen could not yet prove that something was wrong, but her instincts told her to keep a closer eye on both of them.
The morning after Marisol's body was discovered, the Carnival cruise ship felt different, as if the decorations, music, and cheerful announcements no longer knew their place. The same bright hallways that had once promised escape and adventure now carried a quiet heaviness no one could explain. Crew members moved more carefully, as though afraid to leave footprints on a crime scene that stretched far beyond the cabin where her body had been found. Guests whispered without understanding the gravity of what had happened only a few decks below them. Daryl hadn't slept. He couldn't. The moment officers escorted him out of the interrogation room and into a holding cabin, his mind began replaying every second of the cruise. He tried to recall every look, every movement, every uneasy feeling he had ignored when it came to Bram Rowan. The man had been too charming, too perfect, too good at watching without blinking. The details were clearer now, when it was too late to matter. Daryl couldn't shake the guilt that he had been so blinded by loneliness that he couldn't see the danger walking beside them all along. Meanwhile, ship security worked nonstop. The ship's captain requested support from maritime investigators, and by sunrise, Helene, the lead onboard security officer, had a team going cabin to cabin with quiet urgency. They wanted to gather timelines, witness accounts, and any possible sightings of Bram Rowan in the final hours before Marisol's death. Passengers sensed something terrible had happened, but the crew maintained tight control of information, hoping panic wouldn't spread before reaching the port. Helene knew she was racing a clock. Once the ship docked, outside authorities would take over, and she wasn't confident the truth would be easy to untangle. Maritime crimes were notoriously complicated. Jurisdiction changed depending on location, citizenship, and ship ownership. She didn't want Marisol's death to disappear into a maze of paperwork and international laws. She needed answers now. Harlow, the forensic technician brought on board at the previous port, began reconstructing the events of the night. Every injury mattered. Every detail was a clue. The torn mouth, the bruising around Marisol's neck, the pattern of abrasions on her arms, they all painted a picture of violence, but not the kind typical of sudden rage. It felt calculated, almost staged. That troubled her. While Harlow worked, Bernada, one of the junior investigators, combed through surveillance footage again and again. She created a timeline for Marisol's movements, then another for Daryl, then one for Bram. She noticed an unsettling pattern. Bram always seemed to position himself near the edges of cameras, not avoiding them, just close enough that only glimpses of his silhouette appeared. A shoulder here, a shoe there, the side of his face when he leaned to tie his laces. It was minimal, too minimal, and that was what made it suspicious. People rarely moved that carefully unless they felt watched. Bernada downloaded the files onto a secured drive and brought them to Helene. The two women reviewed each clip slowly. They saw Marisol exiting the buffet area. They saw Daryl minutes later heading toward the upper deck bar. Then Bram appeared in the background of the next clip, leaning on a railing, looking calm, scanning the walkways. He seemed to be waiting for something, though there was no sound to confirm if he was speaking or listening. Helene paused the frame and leaned closer. Something felt wrong about the stillness in his posture. It was almost predatory. While Harlow worked, passengers like Kayla started noticing the increased movement of uniformed staff. Kayla had been one of the last people to speak to Marisol before her disappearance, though she didn't know that at the time. She remembered Marisol smiling at her in a way that seemed distracted, as if her heart was occupied with thoughts of someone else. Kayla remembered wanting to warn her to be careful. Something about Bram had unsettled her too the few times she saw him, but she stayed quiet. Now guilt gnawed at her as rumors whispered through the ship. To her surprise, a crew member came to her table during breakfast, asking her to report to security. Kayla followed nervously, unsure if she had done something wrong. When Helene asked her to recount the last conversation she had with Marisol, Kayla tried to stay strong, but the weight of knowing what had happened made her voice tremble. She described Marisol's mood, her excitement about the night, the confidence she had in Bram. Helene took notes meticulously. Kayla's account confirmed Marisol had willingly sought out Bram that night. That complicated things. It didn't excuse anything, but it meant the investigators needed a different angle.
As interviews continued, a new piece of evidence surfaced. A bracelet. It had been found near the service stairwell on Deck 6, far from the central passenger areas. The bracelet was simple, nothing expensive, but unmistakably Marisol's. She wore it in every photo on her social media profiles and had been seen with it at dinner the night before. The stairwell where it was found had no cameras. It led to maintenance routes only crew typically used. That meant either Marisol somehow wandered there alone or someone forced her there. Helene knew which possibility was more likely. She sent the bracelet to Harlow immediately. Harlow examined it under magnification, noting faint scratches on the clasp. Something had pulled it loose. Something violent. The scratches didn't look like accidental wear. They looked like signs of struggle. She bagged the evidence and reported her observations to Helene, who felt the pressure in her chest tighten. The investigation was beginning to move forward, but without Bram in custody, every answer only raised more questions. That afternoon, they received confirmation from the ship's registration logs that Bram Rowan hadn't boarded at any official checkpoint. He wasn't on any passenger list, crew list, or vendor list. His cabin had been booked under a different name, a man who had never shown up to the port of departure. The photo on file didn't match Bram at all. Someone had used another person's identity to board the ship. Helene's stomach dropped. That meant Bram had planned something long before he met Marisol. Or perhaps he targeted her before the cruise even began. Daryl, still isolated in the holding cabin, knew nothing of these developments. He sat with his head bowed, trying to hold back waves of grief and disbelief. He kept replying the last time he saw Marisol smiling, a sincere, hopeful smile meant for a man who didn't deserve it. He felt shame for introducing himself to her, for joining her table, for not seeing the truth in time. Every part of him believed he could have stopped what happened if he hadn't been so desperate for companionship. He didn't realize yet that Bram had likely made his choice the moment he boarded the ship. Night approached, and the ship's lights reflected in the dark water as though thousands of tiny stars floated beneath the surface. Passengers returned to their cabins early. No one wanted to be wandering the hallways with the shadow of a killer possibly still on board. In the middle of this uneasy quiet, Helene received a message from Harlow. The autopsy results had been expanded after a second review. There was an injury they had initially missed, a small puncture wound behind Marisol's left ear. It wasn't deep enough to be fatal, but it was too precise to be accidental. Harlow believed it might have been caused by a specialized tool or syringe. That detail changed everything. It meant Marisol may have been immobilized before the assault took place. Helene realized the case had just evolved from a crime of opportunity to something deliberate, sophisticated, and disturbing. Someone on board had used tools and methods suggesting experience, possibly past crimes. Bram Rowan was no ordinary passenger. He was something else entirely. And he was still missing. Before Helene could process the implications, another alert came in. A staff member had reported seeing a man resembling Bram near the lifeboat deck shortly after sunrise. He had been wearing different clothes, ones that belonged to the crew. The staff member assumed he was new and didn't think much of it. Only after hearing whispers about the investigation did she remember the unsettling feeling she got from him. Helene stared at the report. If Bram had disguised himself as crew, he could access restricted areas, food storage, ventilation rooms, or lifeboats. He could hide for hours, days, possibly until the next port. The realization chilled her. The hunt for Bram had officially become a race, and the ship, once a place of leisure and laughter, had turned into a floating trap. But the worst truth lingered unspoken in Helene's mind. If Bram had gone to such lengths already, there was no guarantee Marisol was his only victim, and no guarantee she would be his last.
As the Carnival cruise ship pushed steadily across open water in the final stretch before docking, the air felt heavy with tension no amount of ocean breeze could disguise. Word had spread that someone dangerous was aboard, but no one knew his name, his appearance, or his intentions. The ship's cheerful music played as scheduled, but the sound felt wrong, like a cheerful tune drifting through a dark alley. Passengers stuck close to their cabins, doors locked, lights kept low. Mothers held their children closer, couples stayed arm in arm, and crew members exchanged looks of unease each time someone unfamiliar passed by.
It was impossible to relax, knowing Marisol's killer was likely still walking their halls. Helene stood in the operations room, staring out the ship layout projected on the central screen. Beside her, Bernetta and Harlow studied the same map with growing concern. The report about Bram posing as crew created a fresh nightmare. They had hundreds of uniforms on board, and Bram could have swapped them several times by now. He could be blending in effortlessly, silently, walking past trained officers without raising suspicion. They had to think differently. Bernetta pointed at the maze-like set of hallways behind the lower crew quarters, noting how easy it would be for someone with knowledge of the service routes to move undetected. Helene considered the idea. Bram wasn't on any official manifest. He must have learned the ship's layout before boarding or studied it in detail. His movements were too deliberate otherwise. Harlow, quietly reviewing her notes from the autopsy, spoke up. She reminded them about the precision of the puncture wound behind Marisol's ear. The tool used would likely be small, metallic, easy to conceal, and common in certain professions: medical, veterinary, or industrial. That meant Bram's background mattered, and Helene began requesting records from ports connected to our route. She needed to know if a man matching Bram's appearance had boarded other ships, purchased specialized equipment, or been implicated in other missing persons cases. But results would take time, and time was the one thing they didn't have. Meanwhile, Daryl sat alone in his holding cabin, unaware that he had finally been cleared as a suspect. The investigators knew he had no involvement. His timeline didn't match the injuries, and there was no motive, no opportunity, no signs of violence on his clothes or body. But they kept him isolated, partly for his safety. Passengers hearing rumors had convinced themselves he must be responsible. Some demanded he be removed from the ship entirely. The situation was too volatile to release him publicly. Daryl didn't know any of this. He only knew he was alone, and Marisol was gone. The thought gnawed at him like something alive. He wished he could undo everything, unmeet her, unjoin the cruise, untrust anyone. He wanted to scream, to cry, to fill the silence with something other than the endless replay of her final hours in his mind. Every memory of her laugh became sharper, more painful. She deserved joy, not fear. She deserved safety, not a predator's attention. As the ship moved closer to shore, Helene made a critical decision. She ordered a full crew verification. Every staff member had to report for identity check. They would confirm names, photos, and uniforms. Anyone missing or mismatched would be flagged. It was a drastic measure, but the only realistic way to corner Bram before he could slip away at port. Crew members lined up in uniform rows in the main theater. Officers scanned badges, matched faces to photos, and logged each check. Bernetta oversaw the process from the front row, clipboard in hand. One by one, the crew was processed, but Bram never appeared. Either he was hiding somewhere deep in the restricted areas, or he had found a way to blend in so perfectly he appeared ordinary. Then a troubling discovery emerged. A food storage manager reported that several crates had been disturbed overnight, and in the corner of the storage room, they found a shredded crew uniform and a small duffel bag containing worn gloves and an empty syringe case. There were no prints. The uniform's name tag had been stripped away, and the syringe case held no clues to its contents. Helene inspected the items personally. The uniform was size medium, consistent with Bram's build. The gloves were tight and well used. The duffel bag smelled faintly of antiseptic, oil, and something metallic. It confirmed Harlow's earlier theory about the precision tool. Someone had prepared. Harlow examined the syringe case, noting the odd residue inside. It wasn't blood. It wasn't any visible substance, but under the light it formed a subtle shimmer, almost iridescent. Something chemical had been inside. She would need a proper lab to identify it. Then the ship's alarm system flickered. Not the fire alarm, the emergency alert. It beeped once, twice, then blared through the ship. The message was brief. Unauthorized lifeboat hatch activity detected near Deck 4. Helene bolted for the door, Bernetta right behind her. Passengers felt the shock ripple through them. People left their cabins, looking down long hallways with anxiety rising by the second. Some cried, some whispered prayers, others clutched the banisters as the ship trembled slightly. On Deck 4, the wind whipped sharply and the metal walkway shuddered with every step. A lifeboat hatch hung ajar, with one latch bent and the other scraped as if someone tried to force it open. Helene crouched to inspect the damage. There were drag marks on the floor, heavy ones, as if someone were pulling a load, but there was no body, no evidence of what had been moved. Only the imprints of 2 boots, size 11, leading back towards the interior service doors. Bernetta noticed something else, a faint drop of dark liquid on the metal rail. Thick, almost black. It wasn't blood, at least not human. Harlow arrived moments later and swabbed the sample. She confirmed it wasn't blood, but couldn't identify it. Whatever it was, Bram likely had access to more than violence. He had tools, substances, and possibly medical knowledge. The investigators realized Bram wasn't running blindly. He was staging something, moving strategically, preparing for a finale they couldn't predict. Helene called for a full lockdown of service areas. Officers swept corridors, storage rooms, maintenance shafts, and laundry facilities. Doors slammed shut, keys rattled, radios crocked, but Bram remained invisible. Then came the sound. A metallic clatter from the ventilation access hall. Helene, Bernetta, and 2 security officers rushed toward it, weapons drawn, not guns, but batons and restraints approved for maritime security. The hall was narrow, lined with pipes and dim lights buzzing overhead. They moved slowly, listening for breathing, footsteps, anything. At the end of the hall was a grating pulled loose. Behind it, a tunnel large enough for someone to crawl through. But instead of Bram, they found something else. A cell phone. Helene recognized it instantly. Marisol's. The wallpaper was a photo of her and her sister on a beach back home. The screen was crocked. The edges were smeared with something oily. It had been left there deliberately. A taunt. Bernetta scrolled through the last photos. The final one was taken hours before Marisol vanished. It showed her smiling in the lounge, unaware of the shadow in the background, a faint blur of a man with light eyes staring straight into the camera. Before they could process the horror of it all, the ship's alarm system crackled with a message from the bridge. They were 30 minutes from port. Helene knew what that meant. If Bram reached land, he would disappear forever. He had boarded the ship under a false identity, he had evaded cameras, he had used disguises. This wasn't someone who panicked. This was someone who hunted. She issued one final order. Seal all exits except the main passenger ramp. Every officer would be stationed at the only exit point left. They would check each face, each badge, each step off the ship. No one would leave without scrutiny. Passengers disembarked slowly. Fear etched into their expressions. Officers checked each person. Families were waved through. Elderly couples stepped off trembling. Crew members lined up under strict supervision. But Bram was nowhere. Then, as the last few crew members prepared to exit, Harlow noticed something chilling. A small smear of iridescent residue on the side of a maintenance cart. The same substance found in the syringe case. The cart's lower shelf was empty, except for a folded blanket. A security officer lifted the blanket. Nothing. But the cart was warm. Too warm. Someone had been hiding inside only minutes earlier. Helene looked towards the pier. A man in a port worker's uniform was walking away quickly, back turned, shoulders tense. She called out. The man didn't stop. She called again. He disappeared into a row of shipping crates. Officers sprinted after him, but when they reached the crates, he was gone. No footprints, no dropped items, no sign of struggle. Just silence. The wind carried the scent of ocean water and something metallic. Bram Rowan had escaped, and somewhere on land, a man with deliberate movements, knowledge of tools, and a predator's patience was already blending into another crowd, searching for his next victim. Marisol's torn mouth, her stolen life, her final moments, it wouldn't end with justice, because the man responsible had never planned to stop.